All right, so it appears we've been given the go-ahead. I'm going to read my little script and then we'll get started. I'm just going to ask the two women on the screen right now if you can hear me okay.
I can hear you, Your Honor.
Okay,
Yes.
great. If there's any time during the trial that anyone can't hear me, or if I've muted myself, which happens quite a bit, just let me know and we'll roll with it. Okay. We have just received the message to get started. So I will call the case of Estate of Genesis Petrillo versus Harper Martini and Peony Estates. My name is Judge Mandy Marshall. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless a tournament coordinator tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants so that only people on the screen should be the advocates and me. And I will tell the scoring judges that I am not going to check in with you throughout the round. I've just found that's a little easier. So if the scoring judges ever need anything, just turn on your video or microphone and we will address it. Can the attorneys please make appearances?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Margarita Micheletti-Nojal, and I, alongside my colleagues, Sam Kaplan.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Elliot Trundell.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Will be representing the plaintiff in today's trial, the estate of Miss Genesis Petrillo.
Appearances from the defense, Your Honor.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Tyson, and I, along with my co-counsels, Ashley Santa Cruz and Aishigal Umasak, we represent the defense in today's case, Harper Martini.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
All right. Before we proceed, are there any preliminary matters that the parties would like to go over?
Yes, Your Honor, just a couple of pretrial matters.
Sure.
First, Your Honor, if I may direct Your Honor's attention to a piece of case law that should be projected shortly on your screen. Today's case is a battery claim against the defendant, Ms. Harper Martini, and it involves the deliberate poisoning of Ms. Genesis Petrillo's drink. In Jacob v. Alexander, the Midland Supreme Court ruled that in order to establish battery, we need not prove a physical act. In other words, introducing a dangerous substance into someone's drink does qualify as battery in Midlands.
That's our understanding as well, Your Honor.
Great.
Next, Your Honor, if I could direct your attention to stipulations 3 and 4, that simply state that exhibits pre-marked 1 through 11 have already been pre-admitted into evidence.
Okay.
Next, Your Honor, if we could just read onto the record a couple of the complaint answers that have been admitted by both parties. In particular, statement 8. At a rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, Martini gave Genesis a bottle of Cara wine. The defense has admitted this answer. And statement number 9, Genesis drank the wine that night and then died at or around 9:27 a.m. on June 8th, 2019. The defense has also admitted that answer.
Okay.
That's our understanding.
Great.
And finally, Your Honor, seeing as we've never had the honor of appearing in your virtual courtroom, we'd just like to ask your preferences as to displaying different exhibits and asking for permission to do so.
Yeah, I would like you guys to ask permission, even if the document's already been admitted, just so that we can prevent anything crazy.
Yes, Your Honor. And finally, we'd just like to invoke Rule 603 and 615, which call for this constructive swearing in and sequestration of all witnesses, barring any party representatives. The plaintiff will not have a party representative in today's trial.
Okay. Defense?
No objections to that, Your Honor. We would just like to note that pursuant to stipulation 3, Harper Martini is our party representative today.
Okay, great.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready for trial.
Sounds good. Ms. Tyson, do you have any preliminary matters?
No, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay. Let me read the little thing I'm supposed to read. We will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking.
Opening statement from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. From pen to poison. Members of the jury, in my hand, I have a pen. I can do a lot with this pen. I can write down my thoughts. If I'm feeling angry, I can vent how I feel onto a piece of paper. And that might help. But what happens if writing down my thoughts isn't enough? What happens if after I write down how I feel, those angry thoughts just don't leave my head? Well, today you're going to hear about the defendant in today's case, Harper Martini. And the defendant had a pen just like me. You see, the defendant's son, Casey, was getting married to a woman named Genesis Petrillo. And the fact that the defendant's only son was getting married made the defendant mad. So mad that she wanted Genesis out of the picture. But at first, the defendant tried to write down how she felt. She wrote a letter to Genesis. She wrote that she wanted Genesis out of her life, and she threatened to take Genesis out of the picture the hard way. And if that's where it stopped, if the defendant stopped with a pen, if the defendant didn't turn towards that poison, we wouldn't be here today. But after the defendant wrote that letter, she threw it in Genesis's face. And when Genesis threw it right back to her, the defendant made a bad decision. You see, the defendant was running out of time. Genesis and Casey's wedding was coming up, and the defendant had to stop it. She would do anything to stop it. So on the night before Genesis and Casey's wedding, the defendant turned from pen and went to poison. She poisoned a bottle of wine and gave it to Genesis. And a few hours later, Genesis passed away. Which is why we, the plaintiff, have brought a claim of battery against Harper Martini, the defendant in today's case. This means we have to prove to you two things by a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means more likely than not. First, we have to prove that the defendant poisoned the wine that she gave to Genesis. And second, we have to prove that in doing so, the defendant intended to harm Genesis. Now, we're not just going to tell you the defendant went from pen to poison. We're also going to prove it to you by calling three witnesses. First, you'll hear from Casey Soto, the defendant's son. And Casey's going to tell you how the defendant was possessive and controlling throughout his life, even into his adulthood. He'll tell you that the fact that he was marrying Genesis made the defendant mad. And he'll also tell you that after the defendant gave Genesis a bottle of wine, Genesis passed away a few hours later. So how do we know that the defendant's wine was the source of the poisonous pesticide? For that, Miss Lonnie Paris has your answer. Miss Paris was at the winery on the night before the wedding. And Miss Paris is going to tell you how the defendant started with a pen. Miss Paris found a letter that the defendant wrote to Genesis. That same threatening letter you heard about earlier. And Miss Paris is also going to tell you how we know the defendant went to poison. Miss Paris saw the smoking gun in today's case, an empty canister of pesticide right next to that deadly bottle of wine the defendant gave to Genesis. So how exactly did that poison kill Genesis? Well, today you're going to hear from Dr. Quang, the doctor that was with Genesis the night she passed away. Dr. Quang's going to tell us that she found pesticide mixed with wine in Genesis's stomach. She's also going to tell us that Genesis was twitching, that her lungs were spasming, that her heart was slowing down until she fell into a coma and passed away. Dr. Quang's going to tell you that all of these symptoms align perfectly with pesticide poisoning. And so, at the end of today's trial, My colleague, Ms. Margarita Micheletti Hinoha, is going to ask you to find the defendant liable for battery. Because when somebody takes words on a page and turns them into dangerous action, when somebody turns away from the pen and towards the poison, they need to be held responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Ms. Santa Cruz, would you like to present an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court.
May.
It's the night of June 7th, 2019. Genesis Petrillo is celebrating by dancing and drinking without a care in the world, excited to marry Casey Soto, the love of her life, the next day. Unfortunately, in the middle of the night, Genesis Petrillo is rushed to the hospital. He's alone, helpless, and afraid. By 8 a.m., Genesis Petrillo is given a treatment for pesticide poisoning. And just 5 minutes later, she begins coughing, seizing, falls into a coma, and dies. Members of the jury, that's why we're here today. Mr. Kaplan just got up here and told you a story that Miss Martini had from pen to poison. But throughout today's trial, you'll hear that's not even plausible. Because Harper Martini loved her son more than anything in this entire world. Harper Martini would never do anything to jeopardize her relationship with her son or the business she spent years and years building. Harper Martini had nothing to gain and everything to lose. In bringing this case, the plaintiff must prove that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned wine, that she did so on purpose, and Genesis Petrillo died as a direct and proximate result of drinking that wine. They have to prove that to you by a preponderance of the evidence. But the plaintiff will fail to meet their burden. Because Harper Martini would never do anything to jeopardize her relationship with her son by poisoning a bottle that her own son could have drank, and everything to lose. As the defense, we have no burden in today's case, but we're still going to call 3 witnesses to show you that the bottle of wine in this case didn't poison Genesis Petrillo. First, Dr. Rebecca Cannon will come before you. She'll walk you through that unsound examination that Dr. Quang performed. She'll tell you that it was just minutes after Dr. Quang administered this treatment that Genesis Petrillo began coughing, seizing, fell into a coma, and ultimately died. The plaintiff needs you to believe that Harper Martini poisoned a bottle of wine. But you'll hear from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner. She'll tell you Miss Martini presented that one-of-a-kind bottle of Cara wine in front of everyone at the wedding rehearsal. So you'll know the plaintiff's story isn't plausible. Because if Harper Martini had a plan to poison wine, it doesn't make sense she presented it so publicly. Harper Martini herself will take the stand. She'll testify she loves her son more than anything in this entire world. By the time she leaves that stand, it'll be clear that she had nothing to gain by poisoning a bottle of wine her own son could have drank, and everything to lose by doing so. members of the jury. Genesis Petrio's death is a tragedy. No one denies it. But the evidence will show Harper Martini didn't cause this tragedy. That's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Amanda Tyson, will come before you and ask you to find Harper Martini not liable, because Harper Martini had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. All right. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, please switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen, and this will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time.
Plaintiff's first witness, Your Honor.
Give me just 1 second.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I am ready if you are.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto to the stand. May I proceed?
All right, you may.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Casey Soto.
Mr. Soto, do you know why you're here today?
I've been asked to talk about my fiance, Genesis, and also about my mom, Harper Martini, who has been accused of killing her. I'd honestly rather not be here, but I've been subpoenaed.
Mr. Soto, thank you for being here. I want to start by talking about your relationship with Genesis Petrio.
Sure.
How did you two meet?
Well, I'm a 5th grade teacher here in town at River Valley Elementary School. And one day, Jen came in to give a presentation to my class about recycling. She was great with the kids. She got them so into the whole thing that it actually became a bit of a problem. They'd try to recycle my lesson plans before class every morning. But Jen was amazing, and so I asked her out.
Where did your relationship go from there?
Things moved really quickly, and it actually wasn't too long before Jen proposed. She did it at school at the science fair, made this big poster board explaining all the reasons that I should say yes. Not that I was ever going to say no.
Mr. Soto, I'd like to move on and talk about your relationship with your mom, the defendant. What's your relationship with the defendant like?
There's not much of a relationship left. I haven't seen my mom in months. I just couldn't bring myself to speak to her after Jen died.
What was your relationship with the defendant like growing up?
My mom raised me alone, and she never left my side. I remember she used to constantly tell me that I was all she had left.
Did the defendant ever act in a way that concerned you?
Yes. I remember back in college, my mom used to show up to my dorm room anytime I was with my friends. To this day, I have no idea how she knew who I was with or how she even got into the building.
Objection, Your Honor. Character evidence, Rule 404. This character evidence is being elicited as Harper Martini being possessive, and it's being elicited to show that because she was possessive on one instance, she continued to be possessive leading up to the instance that we are talking about in trial today, and that is an inadmissible use of character evidence.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, we agree with opposing counsel's contention that this is character evidence. However, if I could direct Your Honor's attention to Midland's Rule of Evidence 404B2, this is actually an exception to the character evidence rule. As we are planning to, it is our contention today that the defendant's motivation was her overwhelming obsession with her son, and this led her to act violently towards Genesis Petrio. And since this is a civil case and not a criminal one, we did not have to provide notice to the defense that we were eliciting this testimony.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, in that case, that's speculation. That testimony has not been elicited. And again, this is still going to character evidence. And because it is going to character evidence and it's being used as a speculation, it's still inadmissible.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, the testimony that was elicited was a description of a circumstance where the defendant came to Mr. Soto's dorm room. We did not describe the defendant's state of mind in this instance. We are only describing the circumstances that Mr. Soto observed. It's not speculation.
Okay. One last comment, and then I'm going to make a ruling.
Your Honor, the way that opposing counsel, the way that the witness is describing this is speculation. They cannot speculate to the way that Harper Martini's actions technically were. And by eliciting this trait, the only reason that they're doing this is to show that she was, that she continued to be possessive throughout Mr. Soto's childhood and up until right now.
Mr. Kaplan, one more?
Yes, Your Honor. Like I said, we're not using it for that purpose. We're using it to prove motive, which is an exception under 404B2.
Well, I tend to agree with the plaintiff at this point. It's not speculative, and it does seem to be a character trait that is allowed to be elicited under the rules of evidence. But Ms. Yumisak, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
You can feel free to re-object at any time if you think it has gotten into a speculative area, but at this time it's overruled. Mr. Kaplan, you can continue with your questioning.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, I'll ask you that question again. Did the defendant ever act in a way that concerned you?
She did. I remember back in college, she used to show up to my dorm room anytime I was with my friends. And to this day, I have no idea how she knew who I was with or how she even got into the building. To me, it felt like every time I was drawing close to somebody, she'd come and intervene.
Did the defendant ever try to intervene in your relationship with Genesis?
She did. After Jen entered the picture, she only became more possessive over me.
I want to talk about that relationship between the defendant and Genesis. Let's start at the beginning. When did the defendant and Genesis first meet?
I tried to keep our relationship from my mom for as long as I could. But after Jen and I had been dating for 3 years, I couldn't really avoid it anymore. And so I brought Jen home to meet my mom over dinner.
How'd that introduction go?
Terribly. My mom took every opportunity to insult Jen. And from then on, she fought with Jen constantly.
How'd the defendant react to your engagement with Genesis?
When she found out, she freaked out. She started screaming. She said she couldn't believe that I was abandoning her. I remember when I told her she was holding this glass of wine, and she just clenched it so hard that it shattered.
Did things ever?
Your Honor, character evidence. Now the character trait that is being elicited is angry. And this anger does not go to motive. The only reason it is being used to show that because Harper Martini was angry in one instance, she was angry again during the night of the rehearsal dinner.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
The plaintiff's contention today that Harper's obsession with her son led her to act in a violent way in regards to Genesis and Casey's engagement. Therefore, just like the previous testimony, this testimony is admissible under 404B2 as it goes to Harper's motive.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, it simply does not go to motive because eliciting a character trait as anger in one instance, just to talk about another angry instance, is going only to character evidence. Obsession and violence is a separate character evidence and character traits, while anger is a separate one. If the motive is obsession and violence, that's not the same thing as anger.
Mr. Kaplan?
Yes, Your Honor. If Mr. Soto had testified that Harper Martini, upon hearing that he was engaged to Genesis, poisoned a bottle of wine, that would be character evidence that supports action in conformity therewith. The defendant acting in an angry way as a result of losing contact with her son is not action in conformity therewith. It goes to further the defendant's motive that she was so obsessed with her son that she was willing to act violently.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No, I appreciate the defense's argument. I think it's well taken, but I'm going to overrule. And Mr. Kaplan, you can continue.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Soto, did things ever improve between the defendant and Genesis?
No. After the engagement, things only got worse. And so when Jen told me that she'd found a job in Paris and that she wanted to move to France, I honestly thought that it was a great idea.
Did you tell the defendant you were planning on going to France?
No, I didn't want to tell my mom that we were moving until there was nothing she could do to stop us.
Did the defendant ever find out you were moving?
She did, and it was actually Jen who told her. But Jen didn't just tell my mom that we were going to be moving away.
What else did Jen say to the defendant?
Jen told my mom that she'd never see me again. Jen told my mom that after we moved to France, we'd be gone for good.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Your Honor, this testimony is an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, may I respond? Your Honor, we're not using this statement that Genesis and Casey would be gone for good for the truth of the matter asserted. We're using it for the effect on the listener, what these statements led the defendant Harper Martini to do.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No, I don't think that's necessary. Then I'm going to sustain the objection. And you can just testify to the moments after the statement was elicited, but we're not going to allow the statement onto the record.
Your Honor, move to strike.
Granted.
Mr. Soto, after the defendant found out that you were leaving, what did she say to you and Genesis?
My mom looked Jen dead in the eyes, and she threatened her. I mean, she said, "My son is staying here in Midland. Whether you stay here or end up 6 feet under."
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. This witness saying that this testimony was a threat is his own view of it, and he's speculating as to whether Harper Martini said this as a threat. He's characterizing as that, but this witness simply cannot do that. He is not Harper Martini.
Mr.
Your Honor,
Kaplan.
yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto is making that assertion based on his rational perception of the situation. Mr. Soto heard the statement himself. He was there when the defendant said it. He's allowed to make the determination whether he felt threatened or not. He is not speculating.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, Harper Martini will come before you today and be on stand. For Mr. Soto to specifically say that it is speculation goes to her mindset, and he cannot testify to that because he would be speculating to her mindset. He can surely give the quote, but he can't characterize it as a threat.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No, I'm going to overrule, and you can continue with the testimony.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, I want to move on and talk about the night of your rehearsal dinner on June 7th. Now, I know this might be hard for you, so if you ever need a moment, just let me know. How did that night begin for you?
It started out really tense. I mean, after the threats, Jen even told me that she was worried my mom might try to hurt her or something. But when my mom got there on the night of the rehearsal dinner, she didn't seem mad. She seemed happy. And later that night, my mom gave Genesis a bottle of wine.
Would you recognize a picture of that wine bottle?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to display what's been previously entered into evidence as Exhibits 2A and 2B.
Are there any objections?
Without objections, Your Honor.
All right, you may do so.
Mr. Soto, do you recognize what's on the screen?
I do. That on the right there is the bottle that my mom gave Jen, and it had that label on it there. It was the 2019 Cara bottle of wine.
What did Genesis do with this bottle of Cara wine?
Well, my mom gave Jen the bottle uncorked. I'm not sure why, but then Jen poured a couple glasses and started drinking.
Mr. Soto, did you drink any of that Cara wine?
No, my mom had said that the bottle was specifically for Jen.
What happened after Genesis drank from that bottle of Cara wine?
By that point, it was getting late, and so I decided to go up to bed. I went over to Jen. I told her how excited I was to finally be her husband. And then I kissed her on the forehead and I said goodnight.
What happened the next day?
The next morning, I was getting ready for the wedding. I was repeating my vows to myself. And that's when my friend ran in and told me the news.
What was the news?
Jen was in a coma. And so I rushed to the hospital.
What happened when you got to the hospital?
The doctors took me away and they took me into this little office next to the waiting room and they sat me down. And that's when I knew that something was seriously wrong. And that's when they told me that Jen was dead. And that I was 5 minutes too late.
Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Soto, and I'm so sorry for your loss. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Yumasaka, if you can give me just one moment before you begin.
Of course.
All right.
Mr. Soto, I'd like to apologize, but I'm going to have to ask you some more questions. Now, on direct, you testified about an instance in college, but you believe that your mother was always good intentioned.
I thought that towards the beginning. That's right.
You believe that her intentions were good.
In retrospect, it doesn't seem that way. But
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, we're pursuing a claim of battery today, which concerns whether or not the defendant poisoned a bottle of wine. Her son's own perceptions of her and her character have nothing to do with the fact of that matter.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel opened up this line of questioning on their direct while they specifically asked about a specific instance in college that happened.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
You may.
If opposing counsel would like to offer instances or things that Mr. Soto witnessed that rebut the evidence that we offered, they're welcome to do so. Simply asking Mr. Soto his perception of the defendant does nothing to further any claim in this case.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel specifically asked if he thought Ms. Martini's actions were concerning. This directly goes to refute that claim. If Mr. Soto would like to say that he didn't think that Ms. Soto was well-intentioned, he's free to do so. This is cross-examination.
I'm going to overrule, and Ms. Yumasaki, you can continue with your line of questioning.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Soto, yes or no, you believe that your mother was well-intentioned when she came to college?
It seemed that way at the time.
So that's a yes?
It is.
Now, I want to talk about your wedding. Your mother spent a lot of time helping you plan the wedding.
She did.
She hired a wedding planner for you.
She said since it was at her winery that it had to be picture perfect.
She hired a caterer as well.
That's right.
And like you just said, she told you she wanted your wedding to be picture perfect.
She said she needed it for advertising purposes. That's right.
Exactly. We are aware that Harper Martini was going to use those pictures for advertising.
That's right.
And you're aware that Peony Estates could get good publicity from having a successful wedding.
She did mention something like that.
Now, on the night of the rehearsal dinner, Harper Martini gave Genesis Petrillo a gift.
She did.
That gift was a Cara bottle of wine.
That's right.
Miss Martini gave Miss Petrillo the bottle of Cara wine in front of everybody at that rehearsal dinner.
Of course, it would have been incredibly odd if she pulled Jen aside. They don't even get along. I would have thought that was very weird.
Well, she did so in front of everybody at the rehearsal dinner.
Exactly.
She even grabbed a microphone to make a speech.
That's right.
And in front of everybody at the rehearsal dinner, she showed off the custom label on the bottle of wine.
That's true.
Now, you saw Miss Petrillo pour multiple glasses of that wine.
That's right. At the time, I thought it was a waste that those extra glasses weren't going to go to anybody. But in retrospect, I'm glad no one drank them.
Mr. Petrillo, I'm not asking you to speculate if anybody had those drinks. I'm asking you if you saw her pour multiple glasses. And you did, correct?
I did see her pour the glasses.
And you have no idea if anybody did drink those other glasses.
No, I saw no one drink them.
And you saw Miss Petrillo with alcohol throughout that night.
With that Cara bottle of wine that my mom gave her.
Well, in addition to that Cara wine, you saw her with champagne.
That's right.
And you saw her around the cocktail table.
She was sitting with some friends.
And now, once you saw Miss Petrillo pour a glass of wine and drink some, you saw her talking with her friends.
I did, yes.
You saw her out on the dance floor.
You're right. Jen's a great dancer.
But you were a little worried about how much Miss Petrillo had to drink that night.
You're right. And that's why I made sure that she had no more after that point.
Well, you left the dinner before she did.
That's true, but I made her promise me that, and I trust Jen.
Well, actually, before you left, she told you she was going to keep drinking that night.
That's when I told her that it'd be best if she stopped, and that's when she promised me she would.
Of course, you told her it would be best if she stopped because she was drinking all night, and you told her not to be hungover for the next morning.
That's right. She told me she'd do anything she could to make the next day the best day of our lives.
And the last time you saw Miss Petrillo, she was sitting at that cocktail bar.
It was right after she drank the 2019 Cara bottle of wine. That's right.
Well, just to be clear, Mr. Soto, she began drinking that wine at around 10:45.
I'm not exactly sure of the times, but that sounds about right.
And you left around midnight.
I went up to bed early. I wanted to get some sleep.
And the last time you saw her, after that Cara wine was consumed earlier in the evening, she was sitting at the
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion. May I be heard?
You may.
Opposing counsel is attempting to elicit testimony that implies that because Ms. Petrillo drank the Cara bottle of wine earlier in the night, it has no effect on it. Its effects would have already been in action by midnight. Mr. Soto is not a toxicologist. He's not an expert in any type of poisons. He can't testify to that fact, and it's improper that opposing counsel is trying to elicit it right now.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, this line of questioning doesn't go to that. The question simply was going to be, after you saw him drink earlier in the evening, the last time you saw him, he was at the cocktail bar. There's no expert opinion being elicited from this line of questioning.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But that is an interesting point that Mr. Kaplan has given the jury right now. So I'll let the testimony continue.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Soto, just to be clear, after you saw Genesis Petrillo drink the Cara wine earlier in the evening, when you left, she was sitting at the cocktail bar later.
That's exactly right. After I saw Jen drink the Cara bottle of wine, she walked over to the cocktail station because some of her friends were over there.
Thank you. No further questions.
Will there be any redirect of this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Soto be allowed to step down.
Mr. Soto, thank you for your testimony, and you're excused. And if I could just have a moment before we call the next witness. Mr. Trindle, are you ready to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Lonnie Paris to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Lonnie Paris.
Ms. Paris, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Of course. Well, I'm a mother first, writer second, girlfriend third, and wife fourth. I used to write full time, but then I got pregnant. Oops. And then I got married. Another yikes. So naturally, I had to stop writing for a while.
You mentioned that you used to write. How'd you get into writing?
Well, I started all the way back in middle school in Virginia, where I grew up. I would write about football games, dances, even gossip. Did Susie transfer or get pregnant? Who knows? I then moved on to writing for the local newspaper, and I loved every single minute of it.
What do you do now?
Well, now that my youngest one is finally in preschool and my husband is finally away for work, I decided that I'd get back into writing and sharpen up my old skills.
Ms. Paris, how are you involved in today's case?
I was looking into Peony Estates on the day of the wedding rehearsal dinner between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. I just want to tell you everything I saw and help in any way that I can.
Before we talk about the day of that rehearsal dinner, let's take a step back. Was that your first time at Peony Estates?
No. At that point, I'd been looking into Peony Estates for a while, so I'd actually toured the winery multiple times.
What did you learn about the winery on those tours?
I learned lots of stuff. I learned about the winemaking process. I saw what kind of pesticides they used. I even ran into Harper.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, there's a lack of foundation as to how this witness learned how to use pesticides. We haven't heard that testimony. And until that foundation is laid, this is improper.
Your Honor, if I may,
You may.
the witness isn't testifying that she knows how to use pesticides. She's simply testifying that she knew what kind of pesticides Peony Estates used based on the tours that she took of the winery. We're laying foundation right now.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, this witness specifically said they learned how to use pesticides and that Peony Estates used pesticides. There's a lack of foundation as to how she learned this.
Well, I think Mr. Trindle made the point that they're laying that foundation right now about the tour. So if you think they never do lay that foundation, then I'll be happy to revisit the objection, but right now it's overruled. Mr. Trindle, you can continue with your line of questioning.
Yes, Your
Yes,
Honor.
Your Honor.
So just to repeat my question, what did you learn about Peony Estates during those tours?
I learned about the winemaking process. I saw what kinds of pesticides they used, and I even ran into Harper Martini on some of my tours.
Who's Harper Martini?
She's the owner of Peony Estates Winery.
Ms. Paris, I want to talk about that day, June 7th. How did that day start out for you?
I was exploring the winery that day when I heard two people talking. One of the people was definitely Harper Martini, but at the time, I didn't know who the other person was.
Did you ever find out who the other person was?
I did. Later that night, I heard Genesis Petrillo, the bride-to-be, given a toast. That's when I realized that Genesis had been the other person arguing with Harper.
Miss Paris, you say that Genesis and the defendant were arguing. Did you hear what they were saying?
I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they were screaming at each other. Listen, I'm used to screaming. I've got a 2, 3, and 4-year-old and a husband, but nothing in my household. Tantrums, fights about taking away my husband's Xbox compared to anything like this.
Well, after you heard Genesis and the defendant screaming at each other, what happened?
I heard them leave the room, and then I walked in and I saw this crumpled up note on the floor, and I immediately recognized the handwriting.
How did you recognize the handwriting?
Well, it was the exact same as a bunch of notes that I'd seen in Harper's office before. The pen color was the same, and it was actually signed with Harper's initials at the bottom. I actually took a photo of the note for the piece that I was working on.
Your Honor, at this time, move to permission to display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 24, constructively outside of the eyeshot of the jury until it's been received into evidence.
Ms. Santa Cruz, is there any objection to this?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Trindle, if you could make it clear when we will be showing it to the jury, but at this time, we'll do it constructively outside of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, and just for my clarification, this has not been admitted?
No,
Prior.
Your Honor, this has not been admitted yet.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Ms. Paris, do you recognize this?
I do. This is the photo that I took of the note.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of that photo?
It is, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, move to enter Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 24 will be so entered.
Ms. Paris, did anything in this note stand out to you?
Yes, actually. Like I said, the initials at the bottom of the note were HM, just like Harper Martini's. At the top, it was addressed to Genesis.
Your Honor, at this time, move to publish Exhibit 24 to the jury.
Any objections, Ms. Santa Cruz?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, this will be constructively shown to the jury at this point. Thank you.
Ms. Paris, what did the defendant write in this note?
Well, Harper offered Genesis $300,000 to leave Casey. She said that she needed Genesis out of her life forever. It really was pretty hard to read.
Did she say anything else?
She did, yes. She threatened Genesis. She said that if Genesis didn't...
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness is characterizing Harper Martini's statements by saying it was a threat. She's speculating as to what Miss Martini intended to say by writing this. It's speculation.
Your Honor, if I may?
You may.
This is rationally based on the witness's perception. The words, "I will take you out of the picture the hard way," could easily be perceived by a layperson as a threat. Furthermore, if I may proffer,
You may.
we have it on a good faith basis to believe that the defense will call Harper Martini today. And when they do, they're free to question her about the specific context of this statement. Until then, Ms. Santa Cruz's objection goes to weight, not admissibility. It's up to the jury to decide whether or not this is a threat.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
This will be your last response, but yes.
Your Honor, this note is already in evidence. It's for the jury to decide and read for themselves what this letter means. For this witness to go ahead and characterize the letter is speculation. She can't testify as to Harper Martini's mindset. And by doing so, it mischaracterizes the letter.
Well, I think your argument is very well stated, but I'm going to overrule. And I think that I agree with Mr. Trendle that it goes to weight, not admissibility. If this witness begins to characterize things even further than just saying a threat, then feel free to renew your objection. But
Yes.
it's overruled. And Mr. Trendle, you may continue.
Yes, Your Honor. To repeat my question, what else did the defendant say in this note?
She threatened Genesis by saying that if Genesis didn't leave Casey, I will take you out of the picture the hard way.
Thank you, Ms. Paris. I want to move on and talk more about what happened that day. Was there anything else you saw or heard that stood out to you?
There was, yes. I heard Harper talking with one of her employees about some wine bottle.
What did she say about that wine bottle?
She said to keep that specific wine bottle separate.
Did she say why she wanted to keep that specific wine bottle separate?
She did. She said that she was going to use it to put an end to the nonsense with Genesis once and for all.
Well, after the defendant said she wanted to end things with Genesis once and for all, what happened?
I saw Harper grab that wine bottle. It was labeled 2019 Cara and leave. And that's when I noticed this canister of pesticides sitting right next to where the wine.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness is a blogger. There's a lack of foundation as to how she knows what pesticides are. We haven't heard if there was a label on the pesticides. We haven't heard if she's used pesticides before. There's a lack of foundation.
Your Honor, if I may?
You may.
We actually laid this foundation back at the beginning of the direct examination when we talked to Ms. Paris about her tours at Peony Estates, when she said that she learned what kind of pesticides they use. She's familiar with the pesticides that they use at Peony Estates, and therefore she can recognize the pesticide in this situation.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Last one.
Your Honor, this is a winery. They have multiple bottles of wine, and they also have multiple canisters of pesticides, which they use for their wine. There's a lack of foundation as to how this witness knows that this specific canister of pesticides was in fact pesticides. She hasn't laid a foundation that there was a label. She hasn't laid the foundation that she knows that specifically this is the pesticide that Peony Estates use. She just said she knew that Peony Estates use pesticides, not that this was the specific canister that they used. There's still a lack of foundation, Your Honor.
Well, I think that goes to weight, non-admissibility, and I will happily listen to arguments during cross-examination about those exact things. So I'm going to overrule, and Mr. Trendle, you can continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Just to repeat my question, after Harper Martini left with the 2019 Cara bottle of wine, what did you see?
When the coast was clear, I walked in and I looked at the canister of pesticides that had been sitting right next to the wine. It was almost completely empty.
Thank you, Ms. Paris. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Ms. Paris, you're not a winemaker.
I'm not, that's right.
You've never used pesticides before.
I've used pesticides at my home. We have a lot of bugs around the farm, but professionally, I don't use pesticides. That's right.
Is it your testimony that you've used pesticides in your home?
I've used pesticides in my lifetime. That's true.
Ms. Paris, you used to work as an investigative journalist at BNN, right?
That's correct. Right before I had my 3 little kids.
But you were actually fired, weren't you?
That's true. They were laying some people off for budgetary reasons, and unfortunately, I was one of them. But luckily, it worked out because I was able to stay home and raise my little kids.
And now you work as a blogger, right?
I wouldn't say blogger. I think that's for young kids. I do some freelance work, though, in between raising my children.
So you're self-employed.
That's true.
In order to get back into business, you needed to write a good story.
Oh, that's true. I wouldn't want to hire me if I wrote bad stories.
So you went through old notes for inspiration.
That's true.
And you came across an old story about Peony Estates, right?
I did, you're right.
You thought that story could save your career, right, Miss Paris?
It's possible. It gave me something to do, so I thought I'd look into it.
Well, Miss Paris, those are your own words. You thought that story could save your career, didn't you?
But it's possible that's true. You gotta write stories to be in the business.
Now, you visited Peony Estates multiple times, as you mentioned in direct examination.
That's correct. I'm very thorough with my work.
Now, you've taken tours around the winery,
You're right.
but you didn't stay with the group, right?
Not always.
In fact, you broke into the employees only area.
That's true. I did a couple of times, A lot of times people like to hide the truth behind closed doors. I know I do sometimes. So sometimes you got to go there.
I'm not asking you about why you broke in. I'm asking you if you did break in, and that's a yes to my question.
You're right. That's true, to see the truth.
And after breaking and entering, you accessed that employees only area, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
And you also broke into Casey Soto's rehearsal dinner.
I was there. You're right.
You saw Miss Martini hand that one-of-a-kind bottle in front of everyone at the entire rehearsal dinner.
That's true, ma'am.
You saw Miss Martini pour a glass for Genesis Petrillo.
I did.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about why you're actually here in court today. You were contacted by TBD Magazine, right?
That's true, miss.
In fact, the editor-in-chief read your story.
He did.
He said that if you wrote a good story about today's case, you would get hired.
It's possible that's true. I'm still not sure if I'd accept. I've liked staying home with my kids, but it's true that he might. You're right.
I'm not asking you if it's possible. I'm asking you if he told you that he would hire you if he liked your story. And that's a yes to my question.
It's true. He said he might offer it if he does like my story. That's true.
And just to be clear, you haven't been hired yet because you have to testify in court today.
That's true. I mean, the story's still developing, so someone's got to be here and talk about what's going on.
Just to be clear, Miss Paris, you're here testifying in court today about the case voluntarily.
That's true. I saw a lot of things that day, and I thought maybe something I saw could be helpful.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Trendle, would you like to redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I ask that Ms. Paris be allowed to step down.
Ms. Paris, you are excused.
Thank you.
And much like Ms. Paris, I am a working mother and my child has returned home. So I apologize now if you hear him crying. I'm just going to need a minute before you call your next witness. All right. Would the plaintiff like to call any more witnesses today?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, we'd like to call Dr. Jim and Quang to the stand.
Yes.
Can everyone see and hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
Permission to proceed.
You may.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Jimin Quang.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the chief emergency medicine physician in the ER at River Valley Hospital. I actually have a shift pretty soon. I specialize in toxicology, which is the study of poisons and their treatment.
How'd you get into toxicology?
Well, I always looked up to the legendary Dr. G.T. Seaver. He's a famous toxicologist. I was a huge Seaver head growing up, so imagine how honored I was when he was my chemistry professor in college.
Where'd you go to school?
I received my bachelor's degree in biology from Georgia Tech before going on to medical school at the University of North Carolina.
And how are you involved in today's case?
On the morning of June 8th, Ms. Genesis Petrillo was rushed into my ER, and it was my responsibility to diagnose and treat her.
We're going to get into that diagnosis in just a second. But before we do, let's take a step back. Dr. Quang, how do you usually go about handling cases like this one?
When a patient is brought into the ER and assigned to me, I ask them what happened, I observe symptoms, take vitals, and begin testing before coming to a diagnosis.
Are these steps a reliable method?
Yes, they're the gold standard for diagnosis in the ER, and they've been peer-reviewed extensively.
Did you reliably apply these steps in today's case?
Yes.
And did you have sufficient information on Ms. Petrillo to reliably use these steps today?
Absolutely. I observed Ms. Petrillo's symptoms, and I took samples of her blood and vomit to use for testing.
So, Dr. Quang, let's start from the beginning. What did you initially think was wrong with Ms. Petrillo?
First, I consider the more common problems that we see in the ER, like alcohol poisoning, but I was able to rule that out.
How were you able to rule out the possibility of alcohol poisoning?
As soon as Ms. Petrillo came into my ER around 3 a.m., I immediately tested her BAC, blood alcohol concentration. It was nowhere near the fatal range.
Are there any other reasons why you ruled out alcohol poisoning?
Yes, her symptoms. I brought along a chart that helps explain what I mean by that.
Permission to put up that chart, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
And Ms. Micheletti Hinoli, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, Micheletti Hinojal. Sorry.
Will this be shown to the jury at this time, or is it constructively outside of the jury?
Yes, Your Honor, it will be shown to the jury.
Okay.
Your Honor,
And-
I would just object actually that opposing counsel puts the demonstrative on the board before showing it to the members of the jury.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
So just so I'm clear, Ms. Tyson, you would like her to show it to the attorneys and myself, but not the jury at this time?
Yes.
Is there any objection?
No.
Not
I'm asking the plaintiff.
No objection to that. We can put it up right now, Your Honor.
Okay, so at this time, it's just being shown to myself and the attorneys, and we are constructively outside of the jury for this portion of the testimony.
Yes, Your
Is
Honor.
that right? Okay.
yes, Your Honor.
All right. Please let us know when we will be bringing the jury back in. But for these questions, I'm going to assume that we're outside of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll publish it as soon as it's projected on the screen, if that's okay.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
So at this point, Your Honor, after defense counsel has a moment to look at it, we'd like to publish it to the jury as well.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. So at this time, we're bringing the jury back in, and they are allowed to see the document, but it is not entered into evidence.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Quang, how did Ms. Petrillo's symptoms rule out the possibility of alcohol poisoning?
Alcohol poisoning wouldn't explain Ms. Petrillo's symptoms of tearing eyes, twitching, lung spasms, contracted pupils, and slowed pulse. In fact, alcohol poisoning tends to cause symptoms that are the exact opposite of these.
So after ruling out alcohol poisoning as a cause of death, were you able to figure out what was actually wrong?
I was. I noticed that all of her symptoms matched perfectly with pesticide poisoning. After running some tests and examining her symptoms further, I concluded that Ms. Petrillo was suffering from pesticide poisoning.
Thank you, Dr. Quang. I want to talk about how you came to that diagnosis, and I want to start by focusing on those tests you just mentioned. Dr. Quang, what did the medical test that you ran reveal?
The test revealed that Ms. Petrillo had organophosphate in her stomach.
What's organophosphate?
It's a toxic chemical found in pesticides. even very small quantities can cause irreversible harm. In other words, it's a poison.
And do you know how much poison was in Miss Petrio's body?
Well, because of Ms. Petrio's extremely low ACE levels, that's an enzyme, I have a pretty good idea.
Why are extremely low ACE levels important?
Extremely low ACE levels conclusively diagnose severe pesticide poisoning. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And in this case, where there's extremely low ACE levels, there's lethal amounts of pesticide.
Objection, Your Honor. Under Kane's Software v. Mars investigations, may I explain?
You may, and I assume, are you going to be sharing that case law with our screen?
I can, Your Honor, if you just.
That would be
give me a
great.
moment. Your Honor, can you see my screen all right?
It says that you've started, oh, there it is. It's just taking a minute. Okay, can I just have 1 second to read this and then we'll go back to argument?
Of course, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor, pursuant to this case law, expert reports were exchanged prior to trial. And in these reports, both experts were required to disclose all pertinent and relevant information regarding their opinions that they would come to on the stand today. Now, Dr. Quang has just testified that low levels of acetylcholinesterase mean that Miss Petrillo, had a high level, a lethal level is what she actually said, of pesticides in her system. Now, what's actually disclosed in Dr. Quang's report is that there is no test to determine the level of pesticides in anybody's system. Therefore, for Dr. Quang to testify today that Ms. Petrillo definitively had a lethal amount of pesticides in her system is not an opinion that's disclosed within her report.
If I may respond, Your Honor.
You may.
Kane's Software v. Mars investigations is a Supreme Court of Midlands ruling that establishes that experts cannot be used for a trial by ambush. This is certainly not a trial by ambush. In fact, we have it on a good faith basis and know for certain that in Dr. Quang's report, she explains exactly that there's no test to measure exactly how much poison is in someone's body, but that one can look at ACE levels, the ACE enzymes. And if they're extremely low, they indicate the severity of the pesticide poisoning. In other words, because Ms. Petrillo had extremely severe symptoms mixed with those low ACE levels, we can determine she had lethal amounts of pesticide. And this is all included in the report. It is certainly not a trial by ambush. And if anything, Ms. Tyson is free to cross-examine our witness shortly.
Response, Your Honor?
1 moment. So, Ms. Micheletti, are you saying that the statement lethal levels of pesticide is contained within the report that you've already exchanged?
The statement lethal amount is not stated, but the explanation that low amounts, extremely low ACE levels indicate, my apologies, that ACE levels indicate the severity. And in this case, they were extremely low, indicating severe and lethal amounts. That is in the report.
May I respond?
You may.
As opposing counsel just stated, we both agree that Dr. Quang did not state in her report that she was able to find that Ms. Petrillo had lethal levels of pesticide poison in her system. That is an opinion she's come to on the stand today in court, and a cross-examination nor impeachment would not be a sufficient remedy. This is an opinion that needs to be excluded immediately.
One last response from both parties, and then I will rule.
Yes, Your Honor. We simply disagree with Ms. Tyson in this case. This is certainly included within her report, even if it might not be verbatim. She explains the process by which she came to this conclusion. That's explained in the report. And furthermore, Your Honor, again, this Kane Software v. Marsgate investigation is about a trial by ambush. It is certainly not a trial by ambush today to say that Ms. Petrillo had high levels of pesticide. Dr. Quang's whole report explains how she died of high levels of pesticide. This is not ambushing the defense in any way.
One last response, Your Honor.
You may.
Your Honor, there's a difference between saying that low levels of acetylcholinesterase, that enzyme, correlate with high levels of pesticide. We're not objecting to that. What we're objecting to is the statement that Dr. Quang was able to definitively determine that Genesis Petrillo had a lethal level of pesticides in her system. That is not disclosed within her report. And because doctors were required to include all relevant information and reports were exchanged prior to trial, this is inadmissible testimony under Kane Software v. Mars investigations.
I am going to sustain the objection. I think that the specific statements that there was a lethal level would have needed to be disclosed due to this case law. So the objection is sustained.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Yes, the portion that will be stricken is any reference to the levels being lethal, but anything else that the witness testified to will not be stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Micheletti, you can continue with your testimony or with your questioning.
So Dr. Quang, after learning that there were high levels of pesticide in her body, were those levels of pesticide causing any problems?
Yes, I actually put together an animation that shows how the pesticide would directly lead to all of the symptoms I mentioned earlier.
Permission to put up that animation and publish it to the jury as well.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
You may do so.
So Dr. Quang, what are we looking at?
This is a representation of your body, and shown here in green, that's the organophosphate, the poison I mentioned earlier.
And how did that poison directly cause Ms. Petrillo's symptoms?
Well, when the poison entered Ms. Petrillo's body, it ended up in the stomach. From there, it spread throughout the nervous system, shown here in green. As the nervous system is what connects all of your vital organs, it led to a whole range of symptoms, from her lungs spasming, her body twitching, her heart rate slowing down, and her pupils contracting and tearing excessively.
Thank you, Dr. Quang. We can take that down. Now, we just learned how Ms. Petrillo had high levels of pesticide that caused all of these symptoms. I now want to focus on how that pesticide could have ended up in her body. Dr. Quang, did the pesticide get into her stomach?
In all likelihood, she ingested it with the wine that she drank.
How'd you know that?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor. Improper opinion. May I be heard?
You may.
Dr. Quang can testify to the fact that Ms. Petrillo had pesticides in her system and Ms. Petrillo had wine in her system. But Dr. Quang cannot differentiate the fact that both the pesticide and the wine went into her stomach together. We actually have it on a good faith basis to believe that this expert will agree that the stomach contents mix and churn so that liquids are indistinguishable once they enter the body. Dr. Quang can't come to this opinion.
If I may be heard, Your Honor.
You may.
Dr. Quang is a toxicologist. She certainly has the qualifications to, in her scientific opinion, determine where she believes that the pesticide came from. Ms. Tyson is free to cross-examine her on that point, but this was established in her report. It's based on her expert opinion and qualifications. And furthermore, it's quite logical and within her realm to follow these steps and come to this conclusion. As a toxicologist, she knows how to identify where a poison might have come from.
Response?
No, I actually don't think that she is qualified to testify where a poison comes from. So I'm going to sustain the objection. Ms. Tyson,
Your Honor.
Any testimony that's already been elicited about where the pesticide might have come from will be stricken, but everything else will stay on the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
And you may continue with your questioning.
Yes, Your Honor. So Dr. Quang, did you ever test Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents?
I did. The liquid in the stomach tested positive for organophosphate, and that liquid was mostly made up of wine.
So what can you ultimately conclude was Ms. Petrio's most likely cause of death?
I can conclude that Ms. Petrio was poisoned by pesticides, likely ingested.
Thank you, Dr. Quang. No further questions.
Examination, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Just a moment to reposition myself. Dr. Quang, you just mentioned that Ms. Petrio had several symptoms of pesticide poisoning. Is that right?
That's correct. All of her symptoms perfectly matched pesticide poisoning.
You're saying all of her symptoms perfectly matched pesticide poisoning now, but isn't it true that when Ms. Petrio first arrived at the hospital, you thought she had alcohol poisoning?
I did, based on the initial symptoms. The two diagnoses diverge based on other symptoms.
So you're changing your statement because earlier Ms. Petrio did have symptoms for alcohol poisoning, correct?
I am not changing my statement.
To an attorney testifying, Dr. Jimin Quang never said anything about changing her statements, nor did Ms. Tyson elicit anything about her even changing it. Chronologically, that makes no sense. So at this point, Ms. Tyson is testifying for the witness.
It's cross-examination, Your Honor. I'm simply asking Dr. Quang a few questions.
Overruled. You can continue.
Dr. Quang, when Ms. Petrio was first admitted, she had the signs of alcohol poisoning.
At first, I did suspect it to be alcohol poisoning. Once I discovered symptoms, contracted pupils, slowed pulse, that are the exact opposite of alcohol poisoning, I turned my focus to pesticide poisoning.
So directing you back to my question, doctor, when Ms. Petrio was admitted, she was nauseous, yes or no?
She was.
She had stomach pain.
Yes.
She was vomiting.
Yes.
And it was at that point that you admitted her for alcohol poisoning.
On suspicion of alcohol poisoning, yes. And then I completed my further examination that revealed other symptoms that caused me to change my diagnosis.
We'll talk about that in a second, doctor. But back to when you first admitted Ms. Petrio, you told the members of the jury that was around 3 a.m.
That's correct.
But you also told the members of the jury about how deadly pesticides are. Isn't that right?
Yes, they can be extremely dangerous.
You say that if someone ingests chemical pesticides, they need to be treated immediately?
Yes.
You're aware that Ms. Petrio, well, she might have ingested those pesticides at around 10 p.m.?
I don't know that.
Well, you're aware that Ms. Petrio was at a winery, correct?
She was at a rehearsal dinner, yes.
And you just told the members of the jury that you found wine in her system?
That's correct.
And you're aware of a report that says there was a bottle of wine found there at the rehearsal dinner?
What report would that be?
Well, doctor, you did review a report that was collected by the police department, didn't you?
You're going to have to be more specific. What report would that be?
Dr. Quang, you are only aware of one report, yes or no?
Could you reference the title of the report, please?
Well, since you can't remember a lot of the reports you collected, we'll move on, doctor. Now, you know that Ms. Petrio was brought to the hospital at 3 a.m., correct, by an Angel Rodriguez?
That's correct.
And this was hours after she had supposedly ingested pesticides.
I don't know that. That's what Angel Rodriguez said.
So based on what Angel Rodriguez said, that's true, correct?
No, I read Angel Rodriguez's report, but due to her intoxication, I deemed it unreliable and did not use it to come to my conclusions.
You didn't rely on anything Angel Rodriguez said to reach a conclusion today?
I read her report. I did not use it to come to my conclusions.
Okay, doctor. Now, when you admitted Ms. Petrio, you never treated her for alcohol poisoning, right?
No, at that point, I concluded that it was pesticide poisoning, and I administered the antidote.
So is that a yes to my question? You did not treat Miss Petrillo for alcohol poisoning?
I didn't, because I was focused on pesticide poisoning treatment due to her symptoms and their progression.
Well, let's talk about why you actually focused on pesticide poisoning. You're familiar with Doctors for Organic Solutions.
I am. I'm on the board of directors for that organization.
This organization is against the use of chemical pesticides?
Yes, they are extremely dangerous.
Doctor, you actually hope your involvement in this case gets them banned from use.
Absolutely. I hope that this case shows just how dangerous chemical pesticides are. After all, Ms. Petrillo sadly died of pesticide poisoning.
Well, let's talk about why you think that. So when you treated Miss Petrillo, you administered an antidote, correct?
I did.
It was only after you administered that antidote that Miss Petrillo had a coughing fit?
Yes, unfortunately, the pesticide poisoning was too severe. The antidote can stop it from spreading, but it had already reached her nervous system at that point and was fatal.
Directing you back to my question, doctor, after you administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning, Miss Petrillo had a coughing fit, yes or no?
That's correct. The pesticide poisoning was too severe.
After you administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning, Miss Petrillo had a seizure.
Yes, unfortunately, she died from the poisoning.
So after you administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning, Miss Petrillo died?
Yes, like I said, the poisoning was too severe, and the antidote, unfortunately, was administered too late.
It was administered too late because if someone ingests pesticide poisoning, they need to be treated immediately.
Yes, and she was. As soon as I realized that she was suffering from pesticide poisoning, I administered the antidote.
Doctor, you'd agree with me that alcohol, when combined with other substances, can have a negative reaction.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
No recross, Your Honor. At this point, we just ask that Dr. Quang be allowed to log off the Zoom call.
Dr. Quang, you're excused.
Thank you.
Right. If oh wait, is this the last one? Yes, this is okay. Would the plaintiff like to call any more witnesses this morning or afternoon?
No, Your Honor. At this point, the plaintiff rests its case in chief.
Let's see. I think I have a script to read. Okay, then if there's no objections, then we will now take a 5-minute break. My clock shows that it is 38 past the hour, so we will come back at, oh, I'm terrible at math, 43 after the hour.
Sounds great, Your Honor.
44, if that's fine. So we'll see you soon. All right. Have all the parties returned from the break?
The defense is back and ready to proceed, Your Honor.
So is the plaintiff.
All right. Would the defense like to put on a case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. May we call our first witness?
You may.
Your Honor, the defense calls Rebecca Cannon to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record.
My name is Rebecca Cannon, spelled C-A-N-N-O-N.
What do you do for a living?
Well, currently I work at Gardner Consulting, where I consult on legal cases over medical issues like pharmacology and toxicology.
How'd you get into consulting?
Well, I started off as an ER doctor in Massachusetts General, and after a decade or so of that, I decided I wanted to join the academic world of medicine. So I taught toxicology classes at Midlands Medical School, and then I went into consulting.
Well, how'd you get into the medical field?
Well, my mother is a cardiologist, and she didn't want me to be a doctor, so naturally I had to be a doctor just like her. I went to Harvard Medical School after I graduated at OSU.
Directing your attention to today's case, how are you involved?
I was hired by Peony Estates attorneys to look over the findings of Dr. Quang over the death of Genesis Petrillo. It's important to note that I have always worked with the defense, and I charged my standard rate of $50,000.
What materials did you review?
I looked over both toxicology reports, the analytical report, and the death certificate for Genesis Petrillo. Along with that, I looked over the expert report of Dr. Quang and the statement of Angel Rodriguez.
Were those materials sufficient for you to reach a conclusion?
Yes, they were.
Now, what method did you use?
Well, I performed an audit of Dr. Quang's findings, and an audit is the industry standard of analyzing a medical report in order to find any discrepancies in the care that was provided.
Is that method regularly relied upon by other experts in your field?
Yes, it is.
Did you reliably apply that method to the facts in today's case?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to reach a conclusion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, I was.
Dr. Cannon, what were you able to conclude?
Well, I found it's impossible to determine the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death based on the information from Dr. Quang. I found that there were other possible causes, but ultimately, because Dr. Quang focused primarily on pesticide poisoning, I am unable to rule out any of the others.
Doctor, let's start at the beginning.
To that same piece of case law that Ms. Tyson used previously about Mars investigation via Kane software. Simply put,
Just so I can be clear, what's the specific statement that Dr. Cannon made that you're objecting to?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon just said that it's impossible to determine what killed Ms. Petrillo. Now, in her affidavit, she does mention that there are a variety of reasons why Ms. Petrillo could have died, but she also does state that the most likely is still pesticide poisoning. I'm simply objecting to the statement that it's impossible to know anything, because that is not included in her report and certainly should have, if that's what she's arguing here today.
May I respond?
Yeah, Ms. Tyson, Ms. Micheletti makes a good point. We held a very strong standard during the plaintiff case in chief. So I'm going to ask you one question. Is the statement, it's impossible to tell, contained within her report?
Yes, Your Honor. May I explain?
Well, before we do, Ms. Micheletti, I saw your facial expressions. It sounds like you might disagree with that. Is that true?
Yes, Your Honor. The words "it is impossible to tell" do not appear. If they're doing the same that we previously did, for example, we said that there were lethal amounts because Dr. Quang concluded that pesticides killed her, and therefore that amount must have been lethal. If they're making that argument and it was inadmissible and that was the standard held, then since the words "impossible" do not appear in Dr. Cannon's report, it should not be allowed either.
May I respond?
You may.
I can actually point you to a direct line. It's line 183, and my co-counsel can pull it up on the screen if you like, but if I may explain, the line is actually, we may never know what killed Genesis Petrillo. Never know is the equivalent to impossible, so Kane software doesn't apply here. The conclusion that Dr. Cannon has reached is that it's impossible to conclude definitively with medical certainty what killed Genesis Petrillo. Now, what Dr. Cannon was able to conclude is what's the most likely cause. And if I may proffer, Your Honor.
You may.
Dr. Cannon will testify that most likely doesn't equate to likely. Therefore, we don't know what's likely to have killed Genesis Petrillo, nor do we know definitively what's killed Genesis Petrillo, only what is most likely out of the possibilities.
If I may briefly respond.
You may.
We have no objection to Dr. Cannon saying that we may never know for sure what killed her, but we do object to her saying that it's impossible to know anything, which is what she previously said. If Dr. Cannon would like to modify her statement and explain that further, we are not opposed, but we simply ask that the testimony saying that it is impossible to know anything, that be stricken, because that is certainly different than saying we may never know for sure what exactly killed her.
Last response, Your Honor.
No, I think you argued a little too strongly during your objections to Ms. Micheletti's expert, and I'm going to hold you to that same standard. I think the Supreme Court in Midlands is very clear about what an expert witness can and can't testify to. And because the words impossible are not included in her report, I'm not going to allow her to testify to that. But she can continue to testify to the things that are contained in her report.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Dr. Cannon.
Before we continue, Ms. Micheletti, do you have any motions?
Yes, Your Honor. Motion to strike the testimony about it being impossible to.
Okay. And again, I'm only going to strike those words, nothing else, and we'll give instructions to the jury to not use those in their deliberation.
Yes,
but Tyson, you can continue.
Dr. Cannon, what were you able to conclude about Genesis Petrillo's death?
We may never know what actually caused Genesis Petrillo's death. I found that there were other possible causes for Genesis Petrillo's death, but ultimately I'm unable to rule any of those out.
Let's start at the beginning. What were Ms. Petrillo's symptoms the night she died?
She was admitted to the hospital, stumbling, slurring her words, vomiting, and having trouble breathing. And it's important to note that she came from a winery, so she likely had access to alcohol.
So based on those symptoms, was it possible to come to a diagnosis?
No, not at that point. You could begin to rule out some diagnoses, but Dr. Quang's observations were still consistent with lots of other possibilities. But it appears that Dr. Quang started to rule things out anyways.
How can you tell that?
Dr. Quang says so in her report. She ruled out alcohol poisoning and as the evening progressed, focused primarily on the symptoms that corroborated the pesticide poisoning diagnosis.
Doctor, I understand you prepared a timeline to show the members of the jury. Your Honor, permission to display?
You may. Oh, wait, are there any objections? Sorry.
I will object to certain of the points that aren't yet on the timeline, Your Honor, but at this point, if it's blank still, no objections.
Okay. Is this being shown to the jury at this point?
Yes, if there's no objections, Your Honor, yes, we'd like to show it to the jury.
Okay. It sounds like there's going to be objections to different elements that are presented onto this document.
Yes.
And we can't unring a bell. So if the parties don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and have some of that argument now, because I don't want the jury to see anything that we can't have them unsee. Absolutely,
Your Honor. It's up to Ms. Tyson, obviously, to show us what's on the timeline.
Is there a way for us to...
The majority of my objections will be concerning either hearsay, speculation, or substantially more prejudicial than probative. If I may be heard and try and clarify a little bit further.
Okay, we'll try to take the objections now, but if we can't, we can always try to get through it as we go through. So let's give it a shot.
Yes, Your Honor. It is my suspicion that this timeline is going to try and establish what Ms. Petrillo was drinking at different points in the night, if I'm correct. If it is the case that Dr. Cannon is being used for this purpose, then she's being used as a conduit to hearsay, because the only reason she knows how much or what Ms. Petrillo was drinking is based on a report that first of all, in which the witness is not in today's trial, therefore it's a conduit to hearsay, and the statements are being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Okay, before you respond, I'm just going to say I think that that this is an objection that we can discuss without having to actually see the statements on the timeline. But as long as Ms. Tyson, is Ms. Micheletti correct that that's what this timeline is going to be used for?
No, Your Honor, there will be no statements elicited on this timeline, only timestamps and observations on this timeline. But furthermore, to address directly her point, there's actually a piece of case law titled Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue, if I may share.
You may.
Can you see my screen all right?
Yes. Okay, give me just one moment. This is a classic piece of case law. Okay.
If I may respond on those grounds, Your Honor.
You may.
May I explain the case law, Your Honor, as it applies?
I'm going to let Ms. Micheletti go first, and then you can respond and give your explanation of the case law as well.
Yes, Your Honor.
I was actually just about to point Your Honor's attention to this case law because it explains how, while experts are allowed to use the materials that they reviewed in order to, in their examinations, they cannot be a conduit to hearsay. And furthermore, they have to use some specialized knowledge onto what they reviewed. Now, I have it on a good faith basis that in today's case, we're talking about the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez. What we learned about that affidavit previously during the Quang direct and cross is that Angel Rodriguez's affidavit was unreliable. Angel Rodriguez was heavily intoxicated, couldn't remember his own name or his best friend's name, and therefore Dr. Quang did not use it or apply any specialized knowledge to use it in coming to her conclusions. And similarly, it's being used for the truth of the matter asserted without any expert using specialized knowledge onto it, and it's a conduit to hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Well, Ms. Micheletti, I think this is the first time I'm hearing about an Angel Hernandez
It was briefly brought up by Ms. Tyson, actually, who opened the door on cross-examination. She asked my witness if she had reviewed Angel Rodriguez, and she said that she read the report but did not use it in coming to her conclusions.
Is that true, Ms. Tyson? Was that in your cross-examination?
Yes, I did ask this, but just for clarification purposes, the timeline that we're showing the members of the jury does not contain any statements. So the objection to hearsay would be premature and inappropriate for the timeline that we're displaying because there's no statement being elicited. Furthermore, Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue, along with Rule 703, allows Dr. Quang to testify to the facts that she read in Angel Rodriguez's affidavit. Just because Dr. Quang deemed it unreliable doesn't mean Dr. Cannon did so. As we see here, Dr. Cannon's actually here to rebut the testimony of Dr. Quang.
Ms. Tyson, I tend to agree with Ms. Micheletti that even if the statements themselves are not hearsay, direct hearsay, they are based on hearsay. But I also tend to agree with you that she is using specialized knowledge to transform those statements. So at this time, I'm going to overrule the objection. But Ms. Micheletti, I'd ask that you stay on top of it and object if once these are shown to us, they are not being used with specialized knowledge and they haven't been transformed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
So at this time, we're going to show it to the jury. Is that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And I will make a specific note, Ms. Micheletti, that once a jury has seen something, we can't take it out of their brains. So if you think that objection needs to happen, be very timely with them, because if you're not timely, I'm just going to overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Dr. Cannon, what are we looking at here?
This is a timeline that I created that shows the specific instances that stuck out to me from the night before the morning of Genesis Petrillo's death. Now, Dr. Quang concluded that Genesis Petrillo ingested pesticides through a bottle of chloroquine sometime around 11 p.m. But if that were true, Genesis would have died relatively quickly, but she didn't die until almost 9 hours later.
Was that bottle of wine the only thing Genesis Petrillo drank that night?
No, I found evidence that Genesis Petrillo was drinking heavily that evening, drinking from champagne that was offered.
To Kane Software v. Mars investigation, at no point in Dr. Cannon's report do the words drinking heavily appear in her report.
May I respond, Your Honor?
He was drinking.
Your Honor, this is an opinion that Dr. Cannon disclosed within a report. One of the symptoms that Dr. Cannon, concluded that Genesis Petrillo could have been suffering from is alcohol poisoning. Genesis Petrillo could have only been suffering from alcohol poisoning if she was drinking heavily. This is contained within a report. This is not a trial by ambush.
Your Honor.
You get one more, and then I'm going to rule.
Yes, in the same way that because Ms. Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning, that doesn't, because our expert didn't say lethal amounts in her report. In that same way, just because Ms. Petrillo could have died of alcohol poisoning, that doesn't mean she was drinking heavily. That appears nowhere verbatim in the report.
Last response, Your Honor.
Last one.
Like we said earlier, this is contained within Angel Rodriguez's affidavit and pursuant to your prior ruling, which said that those are allowed to be used within this line of testimony. This is admissible.
In which case, Your Honor, I would respond that they're using hearsay and there's no specialized knowledge applied to it. They're simply repeating that she was drinking heavily because Angel Rodriguez said she was drinking heavily.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think there's two arguments to be made here, but I think at the end of both of those arguments, I think that we have to hold to that strict line that the Midland Supreme Court has given us. And so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. So Dr. Cannon, you were mentioning.
Micheletti, do you have any motions?
Yes, motion to strike that testimony.
Okay, again, just those specific words are being stricken. Everything else will stay on the record. And Ms. Tyson, you may continue.
Yes, Your Honor. And Dr. Cannon, you mentioned that Genesis Petrillo was drinking at 10 p.m. Can you elaborate?
Yes, Genesis Petrillo was at Peony Estates, a winery, so she had been drinking heavily that night.
Objection, Your Honor, to heavily. I motion to strike those words.
Sustained and motion granted. Please direct your witness to only talk about things that are specifically stated within her report.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, can you tell the members of the jury what happened at 10 p.m. to Genesis Petrillo?
Yes, Genesis Petrillo was gifted a bottle of Cara wine and then drank that bottle of Cara wine.
Objection, Your Honor, simply because this is coming directly from Angel Rodriguez's affidavit. This is a conduit to hearsay, and she's not using any specialized knowledge. She's simply telling us what happened that night. We have no way to verify these statements. They're out-of-court statements used for the truth of the matter subject.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
It is the plaintiff's contention in today's case that Genesis Petrillo drank a bottle of wine contaminated with pesticides. This bottle of wine was gifted to Genesis Petrillo at 10 p.m. by her mother-in-law. This is a statement that is being used for specialized knowledge. Dr. Cannon is saying that if Ms. Petrillo had ingested this bottle of wine at 10 p.m. when she was gifted it, and it did in fact have pesticides, Ms. Petrillo would have died quickly. However, both experts agree that Genesis Petrillo did not die until 9:27 a.m. This is used for direct specialized knowledge.
Yeah, I think at this point, Ms. Micheletti, that we have had ample testimony that she did ingest the wine. I think in the last objection, there was a question of whether or not she'd been drinking heavily. And so that adjective was what the objection was to do. I don't think this objection applies in this scenario because she's not characterizing it. She's just talking about how the behavior affected her diagnosis. If she starts to use adjectives that aren't contained in her report, that I think that would be a different story. But I think Ms. Tyson's done a very good job of directing the witness to only testify to actions without a description. So as long as Ms. Tyson continues to do that and the witness does not add extra adjectives or extra statements surrounding those actions, I'm going to let them in for now, but stay on top of it. So overruled, and Ms. Tyson, you can direct your witness to answer the question.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, you told the members of the
Sorry.
jury that Genesis Petrillo was drinking at 10 p.m. What was she drinking?
Well, at 10 p.m., she was drinking champagne. And then at 10, she was offered a bottle of wine from her fiance's mother. And by 10:45, she'd finished nearly the entire bottle.
Objection, Your Honor. Specifically, it says Genesis was drinking champagne and from a personal flask. That testimony of "and from a personal flask" has not been elicited at any point and simply appeared on the screen.
May I respond?
You may.
Long ago, although we don't have the benefit of the court reporter, Dr. Cannon actually testified that Genesis Petrillo was seen drinking from a flask. Now, you did move to strike that Genesis Petrillo is drinking heavily, but it's still on the record that Genesis was drinking from a flask.
I think that's true as well. I don't have a court reporter, but I'm going to overrule. But I appreciate your attention to detail, Ms. Micheletti.
Yes, Your Honor.
So please continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, did Genesis Petrillo die immediately after drinking the bottle of Cara wine?
No, just 15 minutes after drinking the bottle, around 11 p.m., Genesis Petrillo was seen laughing and dancing.
Doctor, did anything else stand out to you this night?
Yes, at 12 a.m., Genesis was seen ordering at the bar. This wouldn't have been able to happen with the progression of pesticide poisoning. She wouldn't have been cognitive aware enough to order drinks.
Again, Your Honor, objection to Kane Software v. Mars investigation. This appears nowhere in her report.
Well, Your Honor, at this point, it's already on the record.
I tend to agree. I don't think that I can erase that from the jury, so I'm going to overrule. And also, because of the time limits in this jurisdiction, I'm going to try and rule quickly. So from here on out, objections will be just overruled or sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, at what point was Genesis brought to the hospital?
The exact time, we don't know, because Dr. Quang never notes it in her report, which is why I've indicated it here with a break in the timeline.
So what was Ms. Petrillo admitted for?
Ms. Petrillo was admitted for alcohol poisoning initially.
Did Dr. Quang treat Ms. Petrillo for alcohol poisoning?
No, even though she exhibited the signs for alcohol poisoning, Dr. Quang chose not to treat her for it.
When Ms. Petrillo was admitted, what did Dr. Quang treat her for?
When she was admitted, there's no record that Dr. Quang provided any treatment for several hours while Genesis Petrillo was in the ER.
Well, during that time, what did Dr. Quang do?
Well, Dr. Quang notes that she orders 2 tests to determine what toxic substances were in Genesis Petrillo's system.
Did Dr. Quang wait for the results of those tests before treating Ms. Petrillo?
No. Dr. Quang administers an antidote for pesticide poisoning without any tests to confirm or deny a lethal level of chemical pesticides.
What time did Dr. Quang administer that antidote?
Again, Dr. Quang didn't indicate a time, which is why I haven't noted one here.
What happened after Dr. Quang administers the antidote for pesticide poisoning?
Well, just minutes later, Genesis Petrillo has a coughing fit, and then a seizure, and then falls into a coma. And we know at 9:27 a.m., she was pronounced dead.
So, Dr. Cannon, based on your audit, what are you ultimately able to conclude about Genesis Petrillo's death?
The lack of evidence doesn't allow us to determine the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death to any degree of medical certainty. The most likely cause of death for Genesis Petrillo, based on Dr. Quang's test results, was respiratory arrest due to pesticide poisoning. However, in this case, most likely is misleading.
Doctor, why do you say it's misleading?
Well, you know how every high school votes a kid that's most likely to be president? It's sort of like that. Just because it's most likely doesn't mean it's likely at all. And we can't be sure because Dr. Quang never checked.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
You may.
If I may just have a moment to set up.
You may. And please just continue as soon as you're ready.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon. Before talking about today's case, I want to talk a little bit more about you. Dr. Cannon, say I wanted to send you an email. What email address should I use?
Dr. Cannon at defensetalks.com.
That's right, Dr. Cannon. Your email is cannon@talksdefense.com, right?
Yes.
So your email says defense. I also want to talk about some of the professional organizations that you're a part of. Dr. Cannon, you're a part of several civil defense organizations, right?
Yes, I am. And I've only ever testified for the defense. It's common among consultants.
That's right, Dr. Cannon. Let's take that step by step. You're a toxicologist, but you're part of several civil defense organizations, right?
Yes, like I said, it's very common among the defense to call for consultants, as a plaintiff or prosecution usually calls for the treating physician.
And as a consultant, how many times have you testified in trial?
35.
Of those 35 times, how many times have you testified for the plaintiff?
None, but like I said, it's common among consultants to only be called by the defense. So all of my times in trial have been for the defense, civil and criminal.
So just to be clear, every single time you've taken the stand, it's been for the defense.
Yes, which is how it is in the consulting world.
Dr. Cannon, are you telling us that consultants don't consult for the plaintiff?
Not usually, no.
All right, Dr. Cannon, let's move on. And let's talk about the possibility of alcohol poisoning you brought up. Because Dr. Cannon, we actually both agree that that's highly unlikely, right?
Yes, it is highly unlikely, but in this
Let's
case,
talk about why it is highly unlikely. If I could,
Objection asks that my witness be allowed to finish her answer.
apologies, Your Honor, I think it cut off briefly.
Please proceed.
Dr. Cannon, were you done with your answer?
well, I was going to say it is highly unlikely, but in this case, there aren't a lot of likely options to choose.
So let's talk about why it is highly unlikely. If we could put up the chart on the screen, Your Honor, permission to do so.
You may. You may.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe we're having some technical difficulties. Dr. Cannon, we both agree that some symptoms overlap between alcohol poisoning and pesticide poisoning, right?
Yes,
That includes the nausea and the vomiting, right?
yes.
Other symptoms don't match up though, right?
No, some of them don't.
And those are the 5 symptoms you see on the screen?
Yes.
And you'd agree alcohol poisoning would not explain Ms. Petrillo's tearing eyes, right?
No, it wouldn't. But it can't also be classified as specifically only for pesticide poisoning. Lots of other things cause tearing eyes.
Absolutely, but you would agree twitching also would not be explained by alcohol.
Objection, Your Honor, under Rule 403, more misleading than it is probative.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may.
Dr. Cannon is agreeing that it is not in line with the symptoms of alcohol poisoning. Putting an X where she agrees that it is not in line is not misleading.
Response, Your Honor.
You may.
We have it on a good faith basis to believe that opposing counsel is going to put check marks under pesticide poisoning because Dr. Cannon has already testified that those symptoms can indicate a number of diagnoses. It's more misleading for the jury to see that they only corroborate with pesticide poisoning.
Again,
I'm going to overrule, and you can continue with your line of questioning.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, lung spasms are not a symptom of alcohol poisoning either, right?
No, they are not.
Contracted pupils are not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
No,
Slowed pulse is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
no, it isn't.
But all of these are symptoms of pesticide poisoning, right?
They are symptoms of pesticide poisoning, but they are not specific to pesticide poisoning. They can be caused by many other things.
That's okay, Dr. Cannon. Thank you very much. We can take that down. So I now want to focus on something that is specific to pesticide poisoning. Dr. Cannon, you're aware of something called the ACE enzymes.
Yes, I am. Acetylcholinesterase, yes.
Those ACE levels are used to diagnose pesticide poisoning, right?
Yes, they can be.
In fact, they're the key diagnostic indicator for pesticide poisoning.
Yes, they are.
If you have low ACE, you likely have severe pesticide poisoning, right?
Well, you could also have liver disease, hepatic disease. It isn't specific to pesticide poisoning.
If you don't have a liver disease, like Ms. Petrillo didn't, it likely means you have pesticide poisoning, right?
Well, first off, we aren't 100% certain that Genesis Petrillo didn't have hepatic disease. She hadn't had regular checkup.
Dr. Cannon, does her medical report say she had hepatic disease?
No, but she had not had regular checkups for over 5 years.
That's okay, Dr. Cannon. If you don't have hepatic disease, though, then you likely have pesticide poisoning if you have low ACE, right?
Yes.
And Ms. Petrillo had extremely low ACE levels, right?
Yes, from the test that Dr. Quang provided. However, Dr. Quang didn't have those test results before they administered that antidote. So Dr. Quang did not know that while they were administering the antidote to Genesis Petrillo.
So, Dr. Cannon, I just want to be very clear as to what we both agree on. Dr. Cannon, we both agree that most likely Ms. Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning, and a simple yes or no will do for time.
Yes, most likely.
Most likely, those pesticides came from a bottle of wine, right?
Most likely, yes.
And that the bottle of wine produced by your client, the defendant, is the most likely source of those pesticides.
Well, we don't know because the test results in that bottle was done after Genesis Petrillo's death. So we don't know if it was positive before then.
But most likely, it came from the bottle of wine produced by your defendant, yes or no?
Yes, most likely.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. No further questions.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
You may.
Dr. Cannon, opposing counsel has just asked you multiple questions about your conclusion. Can you definitively say what killed Genesis Petrillo?
No. Like I said, the most likely cause of death is respiratory arrest due to pesticide poisoning. However, in this case, most likely does not equal likely at all.
Thank you. Nothing further. And I ask that Dr. Quang be excused barring any recross.
Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Dr. Cannon, you're excused. And if you could just go ahead and call your next witness for time, just move right through.
Your Honor, defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record.
Hello, my name is Blair Celine Osborne. That's spelled O-S-B-O-R-N-E.
Ms. Osborne, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm the proud founder, creative director, owner, PR personnel of the most gorgeous event planning business in Midlands, Bliss by Blair.
How did you get started in event planning?
Well, when I was young, it was a hobby of mine. I did it for friends and family, and that hobby turned into all the success I have today. Right now, I'm planning a top secret wedding. Okay, I'll just tell you, it's for J-Lo, and her and A-Rod are doing just fine, but you didn't hear it from me.
Bringing your attention to today's case, how do you know Harper Martini?
Oh, Harper's a former business partner. I planned events in her winery, Peony Estates, everything from weddings to a funeral wake.
What was your latest project at Peony Estates?
I had planned her son Casey's wedding.
How did that event planning go?
Well, there were quite a few miscommunications, to be honest with you. Harper changed everything from the guest list to the mid-century modern table centerpieces to the Nora Jones acoustic slow dance playlist that I had so meticulously planned out. She said she just wanted the day to be perfect for Casey, which I totally understand. But if you really want it to be perfect, leave it to the professional.
Now, Ms. Osborne, where were you on June 7, 2019?
Oh, I was at Peony Estates, of course.
What happened during that day?
Well, you know, everything went as planned. By the end of the night, everything was lovely. Harper even made a fuss and made sure everybody knew she was making a toast and presented Genesis with a bottle of wine. And she said, "I got this just for you." Oh, nearly brought me to tears, which was unacceptable because I was not wearing waterproof mascara that evening.
Now that bottle you just mentioned, did Miss Petrillo drink from that?
Yes, of course. I saw pour a drink from a glass and pour a couple more drinks at the table.
Who was at the table with Miss Petrillo?
The groom, Casey Soto, and a couple of other members of the wedding party.
Miss Osborne, at any point, did Miss Martini stop Genesis Petrillo from pouring multiple glasses of wine at that table?
No, that would be very strange. She literally gave it to her as a gift.
And did you see Miss Petrillo again that night?
Yes, I did. I saw her and a friend, Angel Rodriguez, at the cocktail bar. You know, they were laughing, chatting it up, but I couldn't stay for very long because I had to go make sure all of the chandeliers were hung at the proper altitude.
And around what time was that?
Around midnight.
How did Genesis seem the last time you saw her?
Well, like I said, I saw that she had been drinking, so I knew she was drinking. And she mentioned to me that she had a stomach ache. So I just told her to go drink some water in hopes that she would not be hungover in the morning.
What happened on the morning of the wedding?
Well, I woke up early to get ready to clear my mind, but the day did not go as I had planned.
Why is that?
Well, I was with Casey in his room going over his vows at around 8:30, and that's when Angel Rodriguez came into the room and broke the news that Genesis had slipped into a coma.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance. May I be heard?
Very quickly.
Your Honor, we brought a claim of battery against the defense. The issue at hand is whether or not the defendant poisoned a bottle of wine and gave it to Genesis. Ms. Osborne's narration about what happened the day after we already know Genesis was in a coma is not relevant to today's case.
Overruled.
Again, Miss Osborne, why didn't your day go as planned?
Well, as I was saying, I was going over Casey's vows with him in his room. And that's when Angel Rodriguez came into the room and said Genesis had slipped into a coma. And Casey left right away because he was understandably heartbroken. And the wedding was, of course, canceled.
Thank you. No further questions.
Please proceed with cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Osborne.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Now, I want to start by talking a little bit about why you're here. You weren't subpoenaed today, right?
No, I don't think so.
You're testifying voluntarily.
Yes, I am.
You're testifying voluntarily for the defendant in today's case, right?
I'm sorry, but what's a defendant?
You're testifying for Harper Martini and her lawyers?
Yes, I am.
Let's talk a little bit about why that might be.
Okay.
You've known Harper for years, right?
Yes, about 4 or 5 years.
In fact, Harper's like family to you.
Yeah, I don't work with her currently, but back in the day, I would say so.
Okay, Miss Osborne, I'd like to move on and pick up where you left off with Miss Umasak about June 7th, the rehearsal dinner. Now, like you mentioned, you saw Genesis at the cocktail station that night, right?
Yes, I did, with Angel Rodriguez.
But Miss Osborne, you never saw Genesis drink any cocktails.
No, like I said, I wasn't there for too long.
You didn't ask Genesis if she needed help getting back to her room?
No, I just told her to drink some water, and I figured it'd be fine.
Miss Osborne, you didn't ask because you weren't worried about how much she drank.
Not at that moment, no.
Now, Miss Osborne, I want to move on and talk a little bit about the wedding planning process. To you, the wedding was doomed from the start.
Objection, Your Honor. to relevance, frankly, Ms. Osborne's emotions about the wedding planner do not matter in today's case. That is not the plaintiff's contention.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, this lays foundation because Ms. Osborne believed this wedding was doomed because the defendant and Genesis were always fighting, which goes directly to the defendant's motive in today's case.
Overruled.
Ms. Osborne, I'll ask you that again. The wedding was doomed from the start.
Yeah, there was some miscommunications, like Genesis wanted like pink flowers, Harper wanted like green for some reason. Very strange choice.
Ms. Osborne, Genesis and the defendant were always fighting.
Yeah, it was some petty stuff.
You even lost count of how many times they fought.
Well, I wasn't always there, but I couldn't give you an exact number.
I want to talk about one of those fights in particular. A few days after the engagement party, the defendant played you a voicemail. Is that right?
Yes, was that when I was doing the floral charts?
Yes, Ms. Osborne, it was a voicemail from Genesis.
Yes, okay, I remember.
And after that voicemail, the defendant was angry.
Yeah, Casey was also upset.
Objection, Your Honor, to the question that was asked. Ms. Osborne cannot testify to if Harper Martini was angry directly. She is not Ms. Harper Martini. She cannot testify to Harper Martini's emotions.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No, sustained. Just ask a different question.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, after that voicemail, you heard the defendant say one of these days, Genesis was going to drink the wrong thing.
Yeah, she was like, she's gonna drink the wrong thing. She sounded very concerned.
Ms. Osborne, the defendant said that that thing would kill Genesis.
Yeah, it seemed like she had a bit of an alcohol problem, unfortunately.
Ms. Osborne, I'm not asking you what you think about Genesis. I'm asking you if the defendant said that that thing Genesis would drink is going to kill her.
Yes, she did say that.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Ms. Osborne is excused.
Ms. Osborne, you're excused. And you guys may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Harper Martini. Please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Harper Martini. That's spelled Martini.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the owner of Peony Estates Winery. We make wine, hold tastings, and host events like weddings.
How did you come to own Peony Estates?
Winemaking has run in my family for generations. My grandparents owned a vineyard, my parents owned a vineyard. It was almost inevitable that I would own a vineyard, and I hoped that my son would too.
Can you tell us about your son?
My son, Casey, is the light of my life. After my husband died, he was all that I had left, really. We became inseparable. I would even take him to work with me most days.
Did Casey ever work with you at Peony Estates?
Of course. Even while Casey was studying to become a teacher in college, he would make the time to work with me at the winery. He'd get to work 10 minutes before I did. But soon that stopped.
Well, why did that stop?
Genesis Petrillo came into his life.
Who was Genesis Petrillo?
Genesis was my son's fiance. They met back in 2012, and when I heard about their engagement in 2018, I was concerned.
Why were you concerned?
After meeting Genesis, Casey changed. He used to get up when the sun rose, but then he started staying out all night. He used to show up to work early, but then he started missing shifts. But it wasn't just his personality that changed. It was our whole relationship too.
How did your relationship with Casey change after he met Genesis?
Casey and I, we always used to be so close. We would play chess every Sunday. He would call me to wish me a good night, no matter where he was. But after meeting Genesis, that all stopped.
Ms. Martini, did you ever share your concerns about Genesis with your son?
Of course I did. I was just so concerned about the effect that she had on him. After I heard about their engagement, I asked Casey, "Are you sure that you want to marry Genesis?"
What did he say?
He said that he loved her and that he wanted me to be okay with his decision. I was still worried, but the hardest part about being a parent is just learning to let go and watch your children make decisions on their own, even if you don't agree with them. So that's what I did.
Ms. Martini, we've heard a lot of talk about that letter that you wrote. Why did you write that letter?
In that letter, I offered to pay Genesis if she would just let Casey stay in Midlands while she went off to France for a job promotion.
What did you write in the letter exactly?
In it, I offered her a check.
Ms. Martini, what made you want to write this letter to Genesis Petrillo?
The thought of my son going off to France and being thousands of miles away from me just broke my heart. I know trying to pay Genesis sounds absurd, but as a businesswoman, I know how money talks. It didn't work though.
Harper, I'd like to talk to you now about your son's wedding to Genesis. When was that scheduled to take place?
The wedding was supposed to be at Peony Estates on June 8th, 2019, but it never actually happened. We only got so far as the rehearsal dinner the night before.
Well, let's talk about that night. How did that night go?
The rehearsal dinner was perfect, just as I imagined it for Casey. The food was delicious. The guests were smiling and laughing. I even got to give a toast, and I got up in front of everyone. And that was when I gave my gift to Genesis.
What did you give Genesis?
A bottle of red wine. During the tasting for the wedding, I noticed that even though Casey loved all kinds of wine, Genesis had a more discerning palate. So I made a new blend that consisted of all the flavors that she liked as an apology.
And what happened after your toast?
I don't know. I actually left the rehearsal dinner soon after that, and I just went to sleep. But around 2:30, I was woken up by a phone call from one of my employees. Someone had been taken to the hospital from Peony Estates.
What did you do after you got that call?
I wasn't sure who was taken to the hospital, so I went to Genesis's room to check on her and Casey. I wanted to make sure that they were all right. But when I got there, I didn't see anyone.
What did you do after you saw nobody was there?
I didn't know what to do. I was exhausted, so I just went back to sleep after that.
Miss Martini, what happened the following morning?
I woke up at around 9 a.m. That was when I found out that Genesis was the person taken to the hospital, and that she had fallen into a coma and passed away shortly after that.
Miss Martini, I have to ask you, did you intentionally put pesticides in the bottle of wine for Genesis Petria?
No, of course not. Genesis and I may have not always gotten along, but she was my son's fiance. I know how it feels to lose a spouse. Seeing my son go through what I felt all those years ago just crushed me. I wouldn't do anything to hurt my son.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
You may.
My son is staying in Midlands, whether you stay here or end up 6 feet under. You heard Casey say that you said that to Genesis, didn't you?
I did hear that, and those are the exact kind of words that I wish I could take back.
Miss Martini, you don't have much of a relationship left with Casey, do you?
No, I don't.
When you found out that Casey and Genesis were going to get married back in 2018, you weren't happy.
I wasn't happy. I was concerned, but I wanted to support my son no matter what he wanted.
Well, you didn't want to support your son and Genesis when they wanted to get married at a different winery.
No, I wanted my son to get married at my winery.
And when you found out that they wanted to get married somewhere else, you were angrier than you had ever been in your entire life.
I was upset. Yes.
So that's a yes. You were angrier than you had ever been in your entire life.
I was very upset. My winery's a special place to me, and I just wanted my son to get married there.
In fact, you were so upset that if Casey wasn't there, you would have slapped Genesis.
I might have in the moment, but I would never do that to a person. I just felt like I could have.
Okay, Miss Martini. Earlier, you were talking to Miss Santa Cruz about what you exactly wrote in that note you gave to Genesis. And I just want to highlight a specific portion that you exactly wrote. I will take you out of the picture the hard way. You told that to Genesis, didn't you?
That's what I wrote.
And then you offered her $300,000 to leave, but she didn't leave.
No, she didn't.
You gave her a deadline in that note of June 7th.
That was what I wrote.
But then on the night of June 7th, Genesis got poisoned. And then she passed away the next day.
I don't know what you mean about her getting poisoned, but I know that she died the next morning.
Ms. Martini, I want to talk more about what you did that night. You got woken up in the middle of the night. And your employee told you that someone was rushed to the hospital. You suspected Genesis right away.
Yes, I knew she had a bit of a tendency to drink, so I thought that she might have drinking too much.
But you didn't call the hospital to check on her.
No, I didn't. Like I said, I was exhausted.
You didn't tell Casey that his fiance was missing.
No, I tried to find Casey, but I didn't know where he was.
Let's talk about what you did do. You went straight up to Genesis's room.
Yes, like I said.
You went up to Genesis's room because you wanted to find the 2019 Cara bottle of wine.
I went to Genesis's room to see if her and Casey were there.
You found that 2019 bottle of Cara wine, didn't you?
I found the bottle just lying on the floor.
Then you picked up the bottle and peeled off the label, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I wanted to throw it out. It was empty.
Ms. Martini, you wanted to throw out that bottle because you put poison in that wine.
I wanted to throw out the bottle because it was just lying on the floor. I didn't want anyone to step on it, and it was empty.
You wanted to throw that bottle away without a label to cover your tracks.
I wanted to throw it out so no one would step on it.
Okay, Ms. Martini. Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Your Honor, no redirect. I just ask that the witness be excused.
You are excused.
And with that, the defense closes its case in chief, and we'd like to just proceed to closing statements.
Yes,
I
sir.
agree.
And I believe there's not a lot of time, so we are going to need to cut down the time of both closing statements.
There's only 4 minutes allowable per close.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll just warn everyone to switch into speaker view, and the plaintiff can present a closing argument whenever you're ready.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. From pen to poison. Members of the jury, we're here today because Miss Genesis Petrillo never made it to her wedding day. Because on the night of her rehearsal dinner, she was given a poisoned bottle of wine. And as a result, she ended up dying in a hospital bed when she should have been standing at the altar. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout all of today's trial, you've heard about the relationship between the defendant and Miss Petrillo. This defendant hated Genesis. She hated how Genesis was taking away Casey, her son, the only family she had left. So the defendant threatened Genesis. And when that threat didn't work, she turned from pen to poison. She grabbed a canister of pesticides from her winery, poisoned a 2019 carat bottle of wine, and gave that wine to Genesis. That's why Genesis died. And that's what we proved here today. Because as the plaintiff, we had to prove to you two things. First, that prior to giving the bottle of wine to Genesis, the defendant put pesticides into it. And second, that the defendant intended to harm Genesis. And we had to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence. Imagine a tipping of the scales. If you were to put everything you've heard from the plaintiff on one side and everything you heard from the defense on the other, and those scales tip even by a feather's weight towards the plaintiff, then we've met our burden. And we have met our burden. So let's take a step back and talk about how the defendant went from pen to poison. Let's start with the poison. Because you heard from Dr. Jim Quang today, the toxicologist who found pesticides in Miss Petrillo's system. That same toxicologist explained how those pesticides directly cause Miss Petrillo's symptoms and eventually killed her on June 7th. And remember, their own expert, Dr. Cannon, agreed with all of us. She agreed that most likely those pesticides came from the wine Genesis was drinking on June 7th. So what wine was Genesis drinking that night? Well, that would happen to be the 2019 carat bottle of wine that the defendant had poisoned just a couple of hours prior. How do we know that? Well, you heard from Ms. Lonnie Paris today, who found our smoking gun, ladies and gentlemen, after watching the defendant leave the bottling room. She found that 2019 bottle of wine next to an empty canister of pesticides. But why? Why would the defendant do all of this? How could the defendant go from mother-in-law to breaking the law? Well, let's talk about the relationship between Genesis and the defendant. Because this defendant hated Genesis. In fact, she threatened her multiple times. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take any of our witnesses' words for it, because members of the jury, we have the defendant's very own words. Leave Casey, or I will take you out of the picture the hard way. You have until the 7th. Genesis, leave Casey.
That's time.
If I can finish my sentence, Your Honor. Did Genesis leave Casey? No. So what did the defendant do on June 7th, 2019? She took Genesis out of the picture the hard way. Find this defendant liable. Thank you.
May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Harper Martini had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And yet, that's why we're here today. The plaintiff brought a claim of battery against the defendant. And in bringing forward this claim, they had to prove to you, by a preponderance of the evidence, that Harper Martini intentionally mixed pesticides with the car wine, and that ingesting this wine was the direct and proximate cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. But they failed to meet their burden, and here's why. Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Well, she certainly had nothing to gain by so openly, so publicly poisoning someone on her own property. You heard today from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner, who told you at this large celebration, Harper Martini got the attention of every guest in the room so that she could gift Genesis Petrillo a one-of-a-kind bottle of car wine. And we know that it was one of a kind because Miss Martini admitted that she created a special blend specifically for Genesis Petrillo. For the plaintiff's story to make sense, they needed to believe that Harper Martini is the most careless criminal in the world to make an entire scene of her own murder plan. But even if you do believe that Harper Martini was unintelligent enough to do so, she told you herself. Listen to the words of Harper Martini. Don't jump to conclusions from pen to poison. Miss Martini told you that Genesis and her didn't always get along, but there were far too many risks. Miss Martini loved her daughter more than anyone in this entire world. She planned, hosted, and paid for Casey's wedding, all because she wanted that day to be perfect for her. Do you really think that she would have poisoned someone on her own property? She's the owner of Peony Estates. If Miss Martini poisoned someone at Peony Estates, she would have lost her business, her livelihood, her income, the very legacy she wanted to leave behind for Casey. But more than that, she could have lost her own child. Casey and Genesis were sitting right next to each other at the rehearsal dinner. Casey could have just as easily taken a sip of wine from that bottle that she gifted to Genesis Petrillo. Members of the jury, Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. So what did happen? Instead, Genesis Petrillo was mispoisoned by none other than Dr. Quang. When Genesis arrived at the hospital, he had all the symptoms of alcohol poisoning. But Dr. Quang chose not to treat Miss Petrillo for her symptoms. Instead, Dr. Quang let her bias and hatred of pesticides get in the way. Dr. Quang didn't wait for test results. She decided to push her plan for an antidote and administer it for pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, it's no coincidence that just after Dr. Quang administers that antidote, Genesis Petrillo has a coughing fit, a seizure, falls into a coma, and dies. Find Peony Estates not liable. Thank you.
All right. Judges, please complete and submit your ballot. All competitors, please turn on your video and ensure your Zoom names are correct so that we may complete our ballots. Scoring judges, please let me know once you've submitted your ballot. I'll ask everyone to stay until everyone has submitted their ballots, and then we will do brief comments.